Hello and welcome to Masking for It, a podcast with a purpose, combining clinical insight with lived experience. Join us as we explore the realities of high-masking neurodivergent adults, debunk myths around autism and ADHD, and challenge outdated and harmful systems as we discuss the ways that can help neurodivergent people not just survive, but thrive. We're here so that the hidden can feel seen, the confused can find clarity, and the future can be different, because it needs to be. You can help us massively by following or subscribing, and in return, we can continue to bring you along behind the scenes with expert guests, pioneering research, and the chance to say you were a part of the change that we're creating. So, let's do this. Please meet my co-host, starting with Dr. Leslie Taylor.
Hello, I'm a clinical psychologist and I've worked with them for neurodivergent people for over 30 years. And I'm also a member of a family with neurodivergent people.
I'm Gail Kane, I'm a speech and language therapist and I've worked with and for neurodivergent people for over 20 years. And I have an extended family with members who are neurodivergent.
And I'm Alexandra Greening, and I've gone from patient to peer with Leslie and Gail as they diagnosed me with ADHD and autism at the age of 26. And since then, we've not only formed a friendship, but an alliance to take on the current issues and difficulties that the neurodivergent community are dealing with. And we are so pleased you can join us today and in each episode to take on these conversations and see what we can do about them.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Yeah, me too.
I think one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is inviting people to join our discussion and to enhance the conversation and bring in lots of different topics and different voices and different opinions, and hopefully give a sense of maybe a bit like the suffragettes, although maybe not quite as violently, making change, challenging policy.
Yeah, I think it's been difficult because in our conversations it's very clear there are so many things that we've discussed that need changing, and you hear murmurs of sometimes, but I think it feels the least natural thing to be speaking on a podcast right now. But we've got to do it because I think if you don't hear your experiences anywhere or you don't see yourself anywhere, you need to be that person in case there are other people who are missing that. And I suppose all of us in the discussions we've had, it's about, for me, high masking autism, high masking ADHD, and neurodivergence in females. And those things are the real niches, which I think have been spoken about in some fantastic ways in the community, but still not quite in our way. And I think the more of us that can offer different angles, the better that is for being able to demonstrate all of the nuances that there are to each one of these things. And once we've gathered the information, then I think it'll be easier for us to be able to come up with solutions and how we go forward so that things are different for future generations, because I think that's the one thing everyone can agree on, is that it can't continue as it is. But we've just got to come up with how we do that, haven't we? It's very early days in what we know so far about neurodivergence.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that perhaps might be helpful to give a bit of context is that we've spent the last 2 years writing a book together and had lots and lots of conversations, quite often late into the night. We can't stop talking, sharing ideas with each other. And we just thought, well, why do we not share this with other people and make it a two-way process and invite people into our conversation? Because we've made each other laugh. We've got really, really serious about it. And I think perhaps we just invite people to join in that and hopefully be heard, because I think one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that, yes, we've got lots of statistics, we've got lots of research, all of it's really helpful. But if we're talking about people who mask, we're not actually seeing them all. And I think when we talk about high masking autism, what we mean is all those people out there who are autistic but either don't know it or are trying to get diagnosed, or are not seen, not accepted because they don't look autistic in a traditional way. And I think what people tend to do as humans and the way that brains work is that we look for shortcuts to understanding. We use what we already know and we use our common sense to try and give us an understanding of what's going on. So we've all got an idea of what autism and ADHD is. And for some people, if they don't have neurodivergent family members or they don't work in the field of neurodivergence, it may be an idea that they've developed from when they were at school themselves. They might have an idea that ADHD is naughty boys and they just need to stop eating Wotsits and like brightly coloured sweets. But then there's something about actually being able to talk about what is neurodivergence and thinking about high masking people. Are those people who don't look neurodivergent but quietly get on with it? They're not counted in the statistics. They're not counted in the research. So this is an opportunity to talk about people and their stories. And yours, Alexandra, why it took you to the age of 26 to be heard and seen, because you were saying all of those things throughout your life. And I think there are a lot of children in our schools and young people today who are saying all these things and are not being seen and heard, despite talking about themes that we probably enjoy talking about and sharing during the podcast. I think one of the things that really struck me is that I don't know whether you watched Educating Yorkshire this week, but already I'm thinking I can see neurodivergent children in that school and they're being dealt with in a way that treats their dysregulation and their distress as behaviour that needs sorting out. And I think that's one of the stereotypes that we really need to dispel, that we can have an idea of what neurodivergent people need, but actually understanding that neurodivergent people are very often dysregulated in settings that are not set up for them means that that's a really key thing we need to offer neurodivergent people, and to help them to learn to self-advocate by advocating for them now. And I guess that's what we're doing as this podcast. It's a massive advocacy project in my head.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like certainly Leslie and I are in that privileged position where, we have our professional qualification and our experience and our professional titles, that it shouldn't be like this, but we're heard more than the people that we work with and for. And I feel really strongly that we need to use that privilege to be able to amplify people's voices and amplify the stories that we hear day in, day out when we're working of young people, children, adults that are struggling with day-to-day life because the world isn't set up for them, and systems don't believe the struggle if they can't see it in a really obvious or stereotyped way. So for me, it's really important that we have the opportunity to talk about the things that help people as well and that are supportive, so that people don't get into a position where they're really struggling, because surely prevention is better than cure, and we don't want people to hit rock bottom before things change for them. We want people to live and be able to live positive and fulfilling lives without having to get to the worst before they can get better.
And I guess that's how I ended up at your door, because I'd been really struggling. And yeah, up until 26, you leave school. I ended up leaving school early. That's a whole nother story. But you leave school, you get a job, which I was really excited to do. Anything but school, and I just wanted to get into the real world. But I still couldn't do that. I still would be extremely drained by things I couldn't put my finger on. I just knew I was suffering. And I think I had an unusual route to you, which again is why I think it's important to speak about my story, because I actually didn't know when I was coming to you that autism or ADHD were going to be on the menu. I thought I was coming for, just to speak to yet another psychologist, as I'd spoken to many, because I would speak to so many people trying to work out, what is it that's not clicking for me? What is it that isn't working in me? Why do I keep failing, is how I saw it. Why can't I function? I just thought it had to be my fault, something I was doing, something that I just needed someone to shine some light on, or, I didn't know what I needed to do. So I came and I spoke to both of you, and you said to me, have you ever considered that you might be autistic? And I said, no, I am really social. I absolutely love people. I'm really good with people. Lots of my jobs have been based around people, and that was actually the good bit of the job that I liked. That was the bit I could do. And absolutely nothing registered in my head that I could be autistic. And the same with ADHD. You said, have you ever thought about ADHD at all? And again, I laughed. I said, I don't have the energy to be ADHD. And, both of those things are really, really major reasons for this podcast, because if we don't know as a society that autism and ADHD can look this way, in a highly masked way, then how can people recognize it in themselves? And that's what is really, really important, because you need to know what's going on with you and not just be frustrated with yourself or dislike yourself, because then you're not going to reach out for the help that you need necessarily. Because there's something about how the diagnosis of that suddenly gave me permission to need help, to need support. And being seen by both of you for that first time just was the most life-changing moment, because it suddenly said, yes, you have been trying your hardest all along. And that's the first time I'd felt that be seen, because before that, I was just a really badly functioning neurotypical person instead of a really incredible neurodivergent person who had done and achieved a lot against the odds and picked up a lot of trauma, but survival skills too along the way. But it just became clear in that moment that I haven't been failing. I've just been given the wrong map, or just not given the instructions that everyone else has. And lots of people say it's like everything and nothing changes, because when you think back on things, it's so clear and it explains so much. But then you also have a whole new element of who you are to understand, especially when your only understanding of autism or ADHD is the stereotypical perception and understanding that the majority of society has. And that's the biggest thing I would like for us to be able to change, is people's understanding, because then we have a chance of doing something about it, treating it properly, and people looking after themselves properly and being permitted to, and not like they have to be punished or criticised into being a different way. We're already a different way, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's different, not wrong. We just need to be able to advocate for ourselves. And that's sort of the miracle of what diagnosis was for me. It was a really hard process, but it's given me a shot at life, which I didn't have before. And that's what I want other people to be able to have. The more I've understood and learned about it, we're just getting it so wrong, but no one's doing that on purpose, because you don't know what you don't know. So the learning journey I've been on, I suppose I just want to shout to the whole world and help people to hear and understand, because if we can do that, we can help society so much. There are so many things we can do and how it can be better. And that should be a really exciting thing. And that should be a really welcomed thing. We just need to help people understand how and why. I want to use my privilege, which I understand diagnosis is, my privilege and my luck to be in that room with you to see me as well. I do not underestimate that. So yeah, that's what we need to do, isn't it?
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I think we hear so much, well, especially this week, I've been hearing a lot about stigma and people not wanting to pursue a referral or an assessment because of the perceived stigma around having a label of autism or ADHD or both. And I think that reducing that stigma or eliminating that stigma comes from busting the stereotype, doesn't it? And having people out there that are autistic or have ADHD or have both, or that can show that it doesn't have to be the way people think it might be, and that, you know, if we're being inclusive and we're understanding difference, then that stigma disappears, doesn't it? And that allows people to access an understanding of themselves and an understanding of what helps them and what makes them function to the best of their ability. And that shouldn't have to wait for a diagnosis, should it? That should just be an accepted part of being and going through the education system and going through the world. But at the minute, we're stuck in that model, aren't we, where people have to wait for a diagnosis or have to be formally identified, and that causes so many problems for the individual, but also for society as well.
Something that's been discussed time and again is how the education system needs updating. It's extremely outdated and for neurodivergent people, unfit for purpose. However, that doesn't mean hundreds and thousands spent, well, millions spent in extra facilities. If we could just take a look at the system as it is and go, okay, what works, what doesn't work. And, you know, we've found there are some schools out there allocating that same pot of money just very differently, but really making things work within that. And it's just a case of we need to round up who's doing what and what is really working out of that. And we just need to be open to change. And it doesn't need to cost the earth. Actually, in a lot of cases, less is more. And actually, oftentimes, adjustments made for neurodivergent people, say in an office, actually neurotypical people really benefit from and enjoy as well. So it's just thinking differently, which is a difficult thing to get everybody on board with. But hopefully what we'll be able to demonstrate is the benefit of doing that, and, you know, actual proven outcomes where it's been beneficial.
Yeah, and there's, like, as you say, there's some really good examples of really good practice, for example, in education, where things work well. And it'd be really good to look at them a little bit more.
Yeah. Cases as well that, you know, that kind of naturally accommodating or naturally adapt to individuals and ways of working, and recognising the talent that they can unlock if they just do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, and I think we need to be happy to have the conversations that say, okay, your business functions like this at the minute, it's not very accessible, but if you open up and make it more accessible to this talent over here, you know, I'm not afraid as a neurodivergent person. I don't feel exploited for a business to recognise that it can make a whole load more money if it harnesses my brain, because actually I'm pleased that's good for them as long as it's good for me. And what is good for me is a business recognising my talent, my abilities, what I bring to the table, and saying, oh, you can't do 9 to 5? That's absolutely fine, Alex. Do it on your terms, as long as we get the results. And there we go. Everybody's happy. Rather than me sitting at home thinking, oh my God, I can do all of this, but I'm absolutely stuck. And it's just like being in a prison, and everybody loses because the companies lose out on certain talent, and individuals lose out on being able to have a purpose, being able to be useful and use their abilities and their amazing abilities that we have. So it would be really good to do a deep dive into those sorts of subjects too, and see what incentives we can do, what people we can find who have had experiences in that realm, and again change the conversation there, because I think another point is that there is a lot of talk about education, still not enough, but there is a lot of talk about education. There is a lot of talk about how to help your autistic child. And though it has really improved since my diagnosis, when I was first diagnosed, I couldn't find resources for autistic adults, ADHD adults. So I had to read all of this advice and sort of interpret, okay, if it helps a child like that, I could do this, but at a time where your identity's getting a really big shake up anyway, it felt really hard to feel so infantilized by just reading advice for children. And I think there have been some fantastic voices since, and that's not so much the case anymore. But there still needs to be more of, as an adult, as a female, how are we addressing that? Because funnily enough, autistic children become autistic adults. And I don't think that gets the recognition it needs to all the time. It sounds very simple, but doesn't seem to be. So that's another point I'd love to look at, and see how that can manifest medically as well, as to what resources are there, what that process is to sort of catch you after diagnosis, because it's not easy to just be told that news, whether you're expecting it or not. There's a lot you have to handle, and there's a lot that GPs, financial institutions, mental health settings, all sorts of things that keep mobilizing afterwards, because it's recognizing this person isn't less, but they're going to need a bit more intervention and guidance potentially here and here. Let's offer it at least, because I remember just saying to my GP, oh, by the way, I've been diagnosed with autism. Do we need to do anything? And she just sort of went, I mean, I can make a note on your record, and that's what we did. So again, very privileged to have been able to have your help, Leslie and Gail, along the way. But again, that isn't something that's available to everybody, and needs to be, because that's a very, very difficult phase.
Yeah, and I feel like I always feel like the burden is often, or more often than not, on the person themselves to explain to people what autism means and what autism means in their circumstances. And that, I just get the sense that must be so exhausting and demoralizing, that the word autism often is shorthand to the stereotype in a lot of people's brains. And so every time you're telling somebody that you're autistic, you're having to explain that it's not what they think it is, it's something different to that. And that actually, if society had a better understanding of what autism is, that would just take the burden off you to have to explain that your GP would know, oh yeah, that makes sense, because I know what autism could be and what it might look like for a breadth of people, and that, yes, and that then activates support that understands that some people are autistic, some people are neurodivergent, and they need things doing in a different way, and that somebody else is leading that conversation and can suggest things to you, rather than you be the one that has to explain and make suggestions of what might be helpful for you. Because, like you say, you're navigating that without really knowing where you're going with it, and being able to access that support from people that know more than what does a stereotypically autistic person look like, has got to make a massive difference then, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And you've hit the nail on the head there, because what I still feel, 6-7 years on now, is actually every time you're telling someone I'm autistic, I have ADHD, you're at the mercy of whatever their understanding of those things are. You are fitting into their definition of that. They're not suddenly understanding, because the understanding in society is that bad about what those things are. And that puts you in a very vulnerable position and makes you feel, sometimes it's really embarrassing. I've been in medical settings before where they've known I'm autistic, because it's on my notes, and they will speak to me extremely slowly and like a child. And whilst I really appreciate they've maybe registered that I need a little extra care or something, I know that's not coming from a bad place. But as someone high masking and intelligent, as many autistic people are, to be spoken to like a child who doesn't understand anything is so humiliating and degrading, no matter how good the intention behind something like that. And that was from a medical professional. And so that says to me, okay, that's not getting taught at medical school as it should be either. But again, I think that's to do with the overall lack of understanding, which we're only just starting to get our heads around.
Yeah, and I think that kind of big tsunami of everyone saying, oh, there's all these autistic people coming from nowhere, where have they all come from? And society's in this panic place where a lot of people are trying to say, well, there can't be that many people because they're only supposed to be 1%. So people are inventing it, people are making it up. Parents are accused of having fabricated illness, or people are being told they don't look autistic enough to be referred. And I think that is the fundamental issue in society at the moment, where people are trying to be seen. High masking people are wanting to be seen and heard, and they're not being. And the response of services is to in panic mode, perfectly understandably, as a natural response to anxiety and panic, is to put the shutters down and say, well, this is not the service for you. We're only assessing people who are in this position or that position or that age. And actually, that's because we've got this diagnostic model that I know for a long time, Gail and I have been very uncomfortable with the idea that we tell someone that they're disordered to be able to see them and understand how the brain works. And I think one of the fundamental things that we need to change is that it's about identity, it's about strengths, and it's about difference, not disorder. And we cannot continue to go down that route of people queuing for a service where they're assessed to see how disordered they are and then told they can't have any more support because it costs too much. And just understanding what autism and ADHD and other neurodivergence is, especially for people who are intelligent and high masking, is free. And it needs to be something that's talked about. And I think one of the things that I'm really excited about in terms of this podcast is that the mix of us that can discuss that is probably something that's not really done much in other places. There's lots of stuff popping up on TikTok by teenagers writing, well, do this 10-minute test, see if your IQ is 140, or answer these 5 questions. If you see a chicken in this picture, then you must have ADHD. Is it a chicken or a donkey? That kind of thing. There's a lot of misunderstanding about that, but actually the talking about it is good. The fact that stuff popping up on TikTok is great, but it's just not really factually correct or not coming from a place where people truly understand the complexities of neurodivergence, and it belittles the issue. It's not really a quick quiz. It's a long conversation. The quality and the nature of that conversation has to change, and I feel really uncomfortable telling people that they've got a disorder. It's just not the right way to go about it. We need to unmedicalise the whole process, tip it upside down, and stop talking about it as a psychiatric diagnosis. That would be a lot of the stigma removed. But I think people are scared. Where are all these people coming from out the woodwork?
And I think it's important to make it a bit more known about what the negatives are for us, so that, you know, yeah, we could go out with friends on a Friday night, but how does that then impact us over the weekend? Or yes, we can sustain a job for actually quite typically a year is a thing, but then we're extremely physically ill because of the psychological strain that's taken to do that. So bringing people into the experience, not to criticize anybody, not to scare anybody, but just to say, no, this is how it actually works. This is what happens. This is what the downsides are. And still with a focus on adulthood, actually looking at how early intervention in schools and education could be really, really helpful to prevent people suffering complicated health issues later on in life, to prevent the school to prison pipeline gaining any more momentum, to help take the strain off of psychiatric units and services. Because if we can work out and even normalise what's going on at an earlier age, then we can hopefully make society a lot more balanced going through and have a chance, rather than letting it build up, and then explode. And I think that's just got to be so much more efficient and, quite frankly, just a kinder way to exist for any human. I don't think we should suffer as we do. And I think there's a lot of assumption that if you're high masking and intelligent, you're not suffering. And the suffering is very nuanced, but it's very, very real. So it's bringing people into that too, but coming up with positive action points of what can be done, because there certainly can be.
I think one of the things that really struck me over the past few years is that when we had the COVID situation, and lots of things changed really quickly, which wasn't necessarily a good thing for autistic people, but things changed in a really difficult way. A lot of people suffered, and it's not to belittle that for many, many people, but I think one of the positive things that came out of COVID was that a lot of neurodivergent young people found life easier for a period of time and discovered what life could be like. And in the context of life being difficult because it's set up for neurotypical people. And so schools having bubbles where maybe young people were just in one building with a smaller group of people maybe not being as close in proximity, having the opportunity to learn at home on video, being able to just have a quieter experience in school, not have to keep getting changed, and being able to wear your PE kit, all kinds of different things that were put in place because of COVID made such a difference in a positive way. And then all of a sudden, we're back to normal. And actually, I think that's where some of this alleged pandemic of young people not being able to attend school has come from, is that actually a lot of neurodivergent young people discover that they just couldn't go back to the way it was before, because it just wasn't sustainable, it wasn't acceptable to them, and they'd seen a different way of being that was really positive. And actually some of the changes that were put in place didn't cost much. They were just about thoughtfulness relating to germs that just happened to really suit some neurodivergent people. And I think that's one of the key things is, as you said earlier, we're not talking about lots of money, we're talking about thoughtfulness in terms of how society is set up for neurotypical people and how we could set up systems that meet the needs of neurodivergent people as well, whether that's in an office or in times of working, how often people have to go to school, how they're educated and how the curriculum's set up. And I think if we continue to go down this route of people having to fight for HCPs to get some needs met, then it's just the system's going to explode, and the system's going to explode if we continue to queue for medical diagnoses. We do have to be kinder as a society. I think that's exactly the word we're looking for. kindness, humanity, consideration, understanding, that all of those things are completely free.
No, I mean, if I'd had school throughout COVID, they'd have never seen me again. I wouldn't have been going back in once I'd had a taste of freedom, because you don't know as well. I think what was another problem with why it didn't get picked up for me was that I was an only child. And I think, you are told by school, look, she's got to be in for registration. There's no doubt about it. And I really struggled with mornings because my energy was just on the floor. I mean, if people could have seen what it took to get me up in the morning, my poor mother and poor me, I hate myself for how I behaved in lots of ways, but I was in physical pain from head to toe trying to come round in a morning and get out of bed. I felt absolutely comatized, and we just fought every single morning to get in, and things like that. You just need to move the curtain so that people can see behind it, because what happens at home never gets seen, and people just think, well, you're fine once you're at school, so sure, they just assume you've had a fine morning, and they don't understand what it's taken to get there. And I think as a parent, the school saying, well, no, the rules are she needs to be in, and being firmer, the more I'd resist and things like that. So as a parent, you're trying to weigh up, well, I can see my child's really struggling, but I also, have pressure from the school and being judged by everybody if I don't get her in, and you're trying to do the right thing. And if I'd had a sibling who maybe did manage, then you'd have been able to know more, okay, there's something that's really different going on here, rather than think, has she just got an attitude problem? Have I been too soft? Or any of those other things. You'd be able to have something to compare to. And that's not always going to shine a light, because still you could have 3 kids that are exactly the same, and they all behave the same as you, actually, because it's a very genetic thing. And within your family bubble, it's really, really hard to see the wood from the trees and go, what is right and what is wrong? Whilst it's not every teacher's job to be a psychiatrist and an expert on these things, I think, given that I went to so many schools and none of them picked up on it, and having dug out my old school reports recently, the signs were there. And that's something that I didn't know. And having looked through that, which was horrendous, there does have to be something on school to go, okay, we see kids day in, day out. That is our thing. What patterns are we identifying here? Or is there something wrong here or that? And there is something on schools to help, because families aren't necessarily going to see it all. Yet at the moment, the balance is very much the other way of, is mum doing enough? What's going on at home? Or, well, the child behaves absolutely fine when they're here, there isn't a problem. All of those things. I don't know how that one especially should be a catchphrase of when they hear themselves say, no, they're absolutely fine at school, I don't know what you're talking about. Ding, ding, ding. Can that please become an alarm bell for, oh, that actually probably means this is going on, rather than the mother's hysterical or there's something like, because I think what's underestimated, and just a sad sort of trait of human nature, is as soon as someone actually does ask for help or actually does have an issue, it's, oh, they just want attention, or whatever people want to say. And so what do? When you're actually asking for help and being met with criticism, or, well, it must just be you, or, blame, that also isn't helping us get anywhere productive, because nobody's learning from these examples. And there's some things I hear now which resonate with my school experience 20 well, not 20, 15 years ago. But you just think, hang on, no, that shouldn't still be happening. So there's all these things to pick, and I think it's definitely looking at who is doing it right and what are they doing, and how can we help everybody to move towards those things, rather than just carry on mistakes which you've got to pray were not intentional. And I have to tell myself we're not intentional, but teachers have a lot of power on a child's life. You remember your good ones forever. You also remember just harsh words forever. And there's a huge responsibility with that, and they don't need to be psychologists, but they do need to be able to raise flags and trying to give the benefit of the doubt rather than criticize. I think it's all too easy, because it's a very pressurized, difficult job. It's all too easy to just jump to the, oh, they're naughty and I'll just chuck them in detention, rather than think compassionately instead. That must be really hard to do on the spot, but it's a way of thinking we need to start moving towards somehow. So we need to work out how we can incentivize that. And I think understanding goes a long way with being able to incentivize people to move to compassion. Because if you don't know why that's important, it's not going to be as easy for you to do, which is understandable when there's a lot going on.
I think as a psychologist, I would say if you can understand someone's behaviour, then you find out how to support someone. But I think that's a good motto to have a person, that if someone's behaviour exasperates you constantly, then understanding why is really helpful for everyone. It doesn't just help the person, it helps everyone around them. So if you can understand why someone's said something to you, behaved in a certain way, whether they're neurodivergent or not, it's a helpful way to understand the world, because it makes people less threatening, less annoying. But for neurodivergent people, it can make a big difference between how they're treated and then who they become. And as you said before, people end up in mental health services, in prison system, in addiction systems. And I think these are topics that we really want to cover in a lot more detail as we carry on the conversation. We would really invite people to get in touch if they've got any of those kind of areas of expertise in their own lives that they want to talk about, and we'd be happy to have people as guests on our podcast and learn from your expertise as well.
That is all for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you come back next time. Please follow or subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. And if you'd like even more of us, you can go over to www.maskingforit.com and find more episodes and blogs on our website, which get into some nitty-gritty detail, because we do love that. And you can also get in touch with us if there's something that we haven't covered, or you have any questions or something about your experience that you'd like to share. Then please send that to us via email. Is contact@maskingforit.com, or any of our socials, which are @maskingforitpodcast. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you so much for being here as we bring the conversation out to the real world to see if we can change it just that little bit. Thank you so much for being a part of it, and we'll see you next time.